Gold in wars and crises. For most of modern life, gold is easy to ignore. We live in a world of digital payments, stock markets, cryptocurrencies, and real estate investments. In peaceful times, wealth often seems abstract. Numbers move on screens, and money flows through banking systems that appear stable and permanent. Because of that, gold can seem like something from the past. But history repeatedly shows a very different reality. When stability disappears and crises begin, the same pattern appears again and again. Wars erupt, governments print money to fund their expenses, inflation destroys savings, banks restrict withdrawals, financial markets close, and suddenly the things people believed were safe are no longer accessible. During these moments, something remarkable happens. The world rediscovers gold. Gold has played this role for thousands of years. It has survived empires, revolutions, financial collapses, and world wars. While currencies have come and gone, gold has remained a constant store of value across civilizations. This is why people throughout history have trusted gold in moments when everything else failed. Paper versus gold. Paper money depends on trust in institutions. Governments issue it, central banks control it, and financial systems keep it circulating. In normal conditions, that system works efficiently, but during crises, that trust can disappear quickly. Governments can print unlimited amounts of paper money. When they do this to cover war costs or economic problems, inflation often follows. The more money that is printed, the less each unit is worth. Bank accounts can also be frozen or restricted. History provides many examples where governments suddenly limited withdrawals or closed banks entirely. When this happens, people may technically have savings, but they cannot access them. Stock markets can also close. During wars or financial panic, governments have suspended trading in order to prevent collapse. Investors may hold assets on paper, but they cannot sell or use them. Gold works differently. Gold does not rely on a government promise. It does not depend on banks, electricity, or the internet. A gold coin in your hand is a physical store of value that exists outside the financial system. That independence is exactly what makes gold powerful in times of crisis. Gold as survival currency. One of gold's most important advantages is its portability. A small coin can hold a significant amount of value. Unlike property or bank accounts, it can travel with you anywhere. Throughout history, people have carried gold across borders while fleeing wars, political upheaval, or economic collapse. In many cases, those small pieces of metal were the difference between survival and disaster. Gold can be exchanged almost anywhere in the world. It can buy food, shelter, transportation, and safety. Even in black markets or informal economies, gold is recognized and trusted. For families escaping danger, this portability becomes crucial. A gold coin in a pocket can often be more valuable than thousands stored in a bank account that cannot be accessed. This is why gold has earned its reputation as a crisis currency. Across centuries, cultures, and continents, the lesson remains the same. Financial systems may change, governments may rise and fall, paper currencies may lose value, but gold continues to endure, and that enduring reality is captured perfectly by an old saying that has echoed through history. He who has gold makes the rules. Alexander the Great and gold. In 330 BC, one of the most famous conquerors in history marched into the Persian capital of Persepolis. His name was Alexander the Great. At that moment, he had already defeated powerful armies and expanded his empire across much of the known world. But what he found in Persepolis was not just another city. It was a treasure beyond imagination. Ancient historians recorded that Persepolis contained one of the largest accumulations of wealth in the ancient world. For generations, Persian rulers had stored vast quantities of gold and silver in their royal treasuries. When Alexander captured the city, he suddenly gained control over thousands of tons of precious metals. This discovery changed everything. Gold became the fuel of Alexander's empire. With it, he paid his soldiers, funded his military campaigns, built infrastructure, and established new cities across Asia. Armies cannot move without resources, and gold provided the stability needed to keep a massive military machine operating. Alexander's conquest continued all the way to India, stretching his influence across thousands of kilometers. But behind every battlefield victory stood something less visible yet equally powerful: the ability to finance war. Without the gold of Persepolis, Alexander's campaigns might have ended much earlier. Wealth made expansion possible. Gold was not only treasure, it was strategy, power, and control. Gold finances empires. Empires are not sustained by armies alone. They require logistics, supply chains, and reliable payment systems. Throughout history, soldiers have needed to be paid, roads have needed to be built, and cities have needed to be maintained. Gold provided the foundation for these systems. In Alexander's empire, soldiers received their wages in gold and silver coins. Reliable payment meant loyal troops. Loyal troops meant stable control over conquered territories. This financial structure allowed Alexander to maintain momentum during his long campaigns. Gold also funded infrastructure. Roads connected distant provinces. Cities became centers of trade and administration. Economic stability allowed the empire to grow rather than collapse under its own expansion. This pattern repeated itself throughout history. Strong empires understood that money must be trusted. When soldiers and merchants believe in the value of currency, trade flows and power expands. Gold played a central role in maintaining that trust. It was universally recognized, difficult to counterfeit, and scarce enough to hold lasting value. For these reasons, gold became the backbone of imperial economies across the ancient world. Rome and the aureus. The Roman Empire provides another powerful example of gold's role in maintaining stability. Roman soldiers were often paid with a gold coin known as the aureus. Each coin contained roughly 8 grams of gold and represented reliable purchasing power across the vast Roman territories. For centuries, this system worked well. The aureus was widely trusted and accepted across the empire. Soldiers could rely on their wages, merchants accepted Roman coins, and trade flourished. But over time, some Roman emperors faced financial pressure. Wars became expensive, and government spending increased. Instead of raising taxes or reducing costs, some rulers chose a different solution. They began to reduce the gold content of coins. By mixing gold with cheaper metals like copper, the government could produce more coins while using less precious metal. At first, the change seemed small, but over time, people began to notice that the coins were losing value. Trust in the currency weakened, prices rose, inflation spread across the empire. This process damaged the Roman economy and contributed to long-term instability. The lesson was clear: when money loses its real value, confidence in the entire system can collapse. Yet even during this period, pure gold coins retained their purchasing power. While diluted currency lost credibility, gold itself remained trusted. History once again showed a simple truth: when financial systems weaken, gold continues to hold value. The Byzantine solidus. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, much of Europe entered a period of instability and fragmentation. Trade networks weakened, political systems changed, and many currencies disappeared along with the empires that issued them. Yet one gold coin managed to survive and dominate international trade for centuries: the Byzantine solidus. The solidus was introduced in the 4th century and contained about 4.5 grams of pure gold. What made it extraordinary was not just its gold content, but its consistency. For nearly 700 years, the Byzantine Empire maintained the purity and weight of the coin with remarkable discipline. Because of that stability, the solidus became one of the most trusted currencies in the medieval world. Merchants from distant regions recognized its value immediately. Traders from China, the Middle East, North Africa, and Western Europe accepted it without hesitation. In many ways, the solidus functioned as a global currency long before the modern financial system existed. A merchant traveling across continents could carry these coins and know they would be recognized wherever trade routes reached. The coin represented reliability in a world where political borders and rulers changed frequently. Gold once again proved that its power came from trust and durability. Gold in medieval trade. Imagine traveling in the 10th century from Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, all the way to Venice. The journey would take weeks or even months, crossing dangerous terrain and unfamiliar territories. Yet merchants and travelers carried gold coins that retained value across every border. A single solidus could pay for clothing, a horse, and a good meal along the journey. Its purchasing power was widely understood. People trusted the metal inside the coin more than the government that minted it. This is one of the most fascinating aspects of gold throughout history. While political systems come and go, the metal itself remains valuable because of its physical properties and scarcity. Gold does not corrode. It cannot be easily destroyed. It cannot be created artificially in large quantities. These characteristics made it an ideal form of money in a time when trust between distant regions was limited. Trade routes such as the Silk Road depended heavily on this universal recognition of gold. Merchants carrying silk, spices, metals, and textiles relied on gold coins to settle transactions across cultures and languages. Long before modern banks and electronic payments, gold connected economies across continents. Gold in the Crusades. During the Crusades, which began in the late 11th century, gold once again became essential for survival and military operations. Knights and soldiers traveling to the Middle East needed reliable payment systems for equipment, transportation, and supplies. Gold served this purpose perfectly. Historical records show that 1 ounce of gold could purchase a horse, one of the most important assets for any knight. Horses were not only transportation, they were essential for combat and mobility. Armor, another critical piece of equipment, required far more resources. A full suit of armor could cost between 3 and 5 ounces of gold. Only those with sufficient wealth could afford the protection needed for battle. This meant that gold often determined who could participate in these expeditions and who could survive them. Those who traveled without gold frequently faced severe difficulties. Without trusted currency, it was harder to secure food, lodging, or equipment along the journey. Some travelers quickly ran out of resources and were forced to abandon their missions. In contrast, those carrying gold had flexibility and security. The metal could be exchanged in markets, ports, and trade centers across the Mediterranean. Once again, gold proved to be more than wealth. It was mobility, opportunity, and survival in a world defined by uncertainty. Napoleon and British finance. At the beginning of the 19th century, Europe was shaken by a series of conflicts that would reshape the continent. At the center of these wars stood one of history's most famous military leaders, Napoleon Bonaparte. His ambition was enormous. He sought to dominate Europe politically, militarily, and economically. Napoleon built one of the most powerful armies the continent had ever seen. His forces achieved remarkable victories across Italy, Central Europe, and much of the European mainland. Many countries fell under his control or influence. For a time, it appeared that Napoleon's empire might become unstoppable. But military strength alone does not determine the outcome of wars. Behind every battlefield stands a financial system that must sustain armies, supply equipment, and keep soldiers motivated. This is where Britain held a powerful advantage. While Napoleon relied heavily on conquered territories and wartime resources, Great Britain developed an advanced financial structure that allowed it to fund long and expensive wars. The British government issued debt, borrowed funds, and maintained strong credit in international markets. Most importantly, these financial operations were supported by one crucial asset: gold. Gold reserves and trusted financial networks allowed Britain to maintain confidence in its currency and its ability to repay loans. That confidence became one of the most important strategic tools in the conflict against Napoleon, the Rothschild role. One of the most influential financial families of that era was the Rothschild banking family. Their network of banks across Europe allowed them to move capital quickly and efficiently across borders. At a time when communication was slow and transportation difficult, this financial network became incredibly valuable. The Rothschilds helped finance British military operations by providing loans and managing the movement of funds. These loans were often backed by gold reserves, which provided reassurance to investors and governments alike. Gold acted as a guarantee. Because lenders knew that the value behind these loans was supported by physical gold, they were more willing to provide the large sums of money needed to support Britain's war effort. This allowed Britain to sustain long campaigns, even when battles were costly and prolonged. The financial system supporting Britain proved far more resilient than many of its rivals. While Napoleon won many battles, Britain's financial stability allowed it to continue fighting year after year. In many ways, this demonstrated an important historical lesson. Wars are fought not only with weapons, but also with financial strength. Gold helped create that strength. Wellington's army. The connection between gold and military effectiveness was also visible on the battlefield itself. Arthur Wellesley, better known as the Duke of Wellington, commanded British forces against Napoleon's armies during the Peninsular War in Spain and Portugal. Wellington understood that soldiers needed reliable payment and stable supplies to remain effective. British troops were often paid in gold coins. This was more than a simple wage. It was a signal of stability and trust. Soldiers knew their payment held real value, and local populations were more willing to trade with an army that paid in gold. When armies travel through foreign lands, they depend heavily on local markets for food, transportation, and supplies. Payment in unstable or unfamiliar currency can cause distrust or refusal. Gold solved this problem immediately. Merchants recognized its value without question. While French finances struggled under the weight of constant war expenses and debt, British gold maintained credibility across Europe. This financial credibility strengthened alliances, supported logistics, and maintained morale among troops. Eventually, the long conflict reached its climax at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, where Napoleon's forces were defeated. Many factors contributed to that outcome: strategy, alliances, and military leadership. But behind these visible events stood a quieter force that had supported Britain throughout the war. That force was financial stability backed by gold. The American Civil War. In the middle of the 19th century, the United States experienced one of the most dramatic internal conflicts in its history. From 1861 to 1865, the country was divided between the Union in the North and the Confederacy in the South. This war was not only fought with armies and weapons, it was also fought with economic systems and financial decisions. Both sides needed enormous resources to sustain their military operations. Soldiers had to be paid, weapons had to be produced, and supply chains had to function across vast distances. War on this scale required money, and quickly. Faced with rising expenses, both the Union and the Confederacy began printing large quantities of paper currency. At first, this seemed like a practical solution. Printing money allowed governments to finance their war efforts without immediately raising taxes or securing large reserves of precious metals. But printing money comes with consequences. As more paper currency entered circulation, its value began to fall. Prices started to rise, and inflation gradually spread throughout the economy. People began to question whether these banknotes truly represented stable value. The war was not only dividing the country geographically, it was also exposing the weaknesses of paper currency when governments rely on it excessively during crisis. Confederacy and Union money. The Confederacy issued paper money commonly known as grayback dollars. These notes were intended to function as the official currency of the Southern states during the war. However, the Confederate government lacked strong financial infrastructure and gold reserves to support its currency. As the war dragged on, the Confederacy printed more and more banknotes to cover its expenses. This rapidly increased the supply of money in circulation. The result was devastating inflation. Within a few years, Confederate currency lost most of its purchasing power. Prices rose dramatically, and ordinary citizens struggled to buy basic necessities. A loaf of bread or simple goods became extremely expensive when measured in grayback dollars. The Union also printed paper currency known as greenbacks. While the Union had stronger economic resources and industrial capacity, its paper money still faced inflation pressures as the war continued. Both sides experienced the same economic lesson. When governments rely heavily on printing money during wartime, the value of that money can deteriorate quickly. Gold market reality. During the Civil War, gold became a crucial reference point for real value. On the New York Gold Exchange, the official price of gold remained fixed at around $20.67 per ounce under earlier monetary standards. But in reality, the market told a very different story. As paper currency lost value, the price of gold measured in those paper dollars began to rise dramatically. At certain points during the war, 1 ounce of gold traded for nearly $300 in paper currency. This enormous difference revealed the true scale of inflation. Gold itself had not suddenly become more valuable. Instead, the paper money used to measure it had lost credibility and purchasing power. Merchants quickly recognized this reality. Many businesses and traders began to prefer gold payments instead of accepting paper currency, whose value could collapse at any moment. For everyday people, the consequences were clear. If someone held a gold coin, they could still purchase food, supplies, or services. Gold retained trust and real purchasing power. But someone holding stacks of paper banknotes often found that those notes were losing value day by day. The Civil War provided one of the clearest historical demonstrations of a pattern that would repeat many times throughout history. When inflation destroys paper currency, gold often becomes the true measure of value. World War I inflation. In 1914, the world entered a conflict unlike anything humanity had experienced before. World War I involved massive armies, industrialized warfare, and enormous economic demands. Governments across Europe suddenly faced the challenge of financing a war that required unprecedented resources. Before the war, many countries operated under the gold standard. This system linked national currencies to fixed amounts of gold, which helped maintain stability in international trade and finance. However, once the war began, governments quickly realized that maintaining the gold standard would severely limit their ability to spend. War was extremely expensive. Weapons, ammunition, transportation, food, and military logistics required vast amounts of money. Instead of restricting spending, most governments chose to suspend the gold standard and begin printing paper currency to fund the war effort. Germany, Britain, France, and many other countries followed this path. At first, the consequences were not immediately obvious, but as the war continued and governments kept printing money, inflation began to spread. Prices increased, savings lost value, and the purchasing power of paper money weakened across Europe. People who had trusted paper currency suddenly discovered that their money was buying less and less each year. This situation created uncertainty and fear, especially for soldiers and civilians who depended on stable income. Gold in soldiers' backpacks. Military leaders understood that paper currency could lose value quickly during wartime. Because of this, some armies adopted a practical solution. They provided soldiers with gold coins that could serve as emergency funds. British soldiers often carried small gold coins known as sovereigns in their backpacks. These coins were made of gold and recognized across many parts of the world. Unlike paper money, their value did not depend on a government promise. A sovereign coin represented real, tangible wealth. For soldiers fighting far from home, this small piece of gold could become incredibly important. War zones were chaotic environments. Supply lines could be disrupted, and soldiers could find themselves isolated or captured. In those uncertain conditions, having a reliable form of value could make a significant difference. Gold coins were compact, durable, and widely accepted. A soldier could carry them discreetly without adding significant weight to his equipment. Yet those coins could potentially buy food, assistance, or protection if needed. This simple strategy showed how gold continued to play a role even in the modern industrial age of warfare. Gold as escape tool. The true importance of these gold coins often appeared in the most dangerous situations. If a soldier was captured behind enemy lines, ordinary paper money might be useless. Enemy forces might reject unfamiliar banknotes or confiscate them entirely. Gold, however, could still function as a universal currency, Captured soldiers sometimes used gold coins to purchase food or small favors from guards. In desperate situations, gold could even be used as a bribe to improve living conditions or attempt escape. History contains many accounts of prisoners of war relying on small amounts of gold to increase their chances of survival. The metal's universal recognition made it uniquely valuable. Even enemies understood the worth of gold. This illustrates a powerful historical reality. In extreme circumstances where institutions break down and formal systems collapse, people often return to simple and trusted forms of value. Gold has served this role for thousands of years. Even in the trenches of World War I, surrounded by modern weapons and industrial warfare, a small gold coin still represented something timeless: security, opportunity, and the possibility of survival. World War II and gold. When World War II began, the global financial system was already fragile. The world had recently experienced the Great Depression, international trade had slowed, and many countries were struggling economically. As the war expanded across Europe and Asia, gold once again became one of the most important strategic resources in the world. Gold was not only a symbol of wealth, it was also a tool of power. Nazi Germany understood this very clearly. As German forces occupied countries across Europe, they systematically seized gold reserves from national central banks. Countries such as Belgium, the Netherlands, and Czechoslovakia saw their gold reserves confiscated and transferred into German control. These gold reserves allowed the German regime to finance parts of its war effort. Gold was particularly valuable because it could be used in international transactions even during wartime. Neutral countries that were not directly involved in the conflict were sometimes willing to trade strategic materials if payment was made in a reliable form of value. Gold provided that reliability. Through gold payments, Nazi Germany was able to purchase certain raw materials and industrial resources that were necessary for its military production. Even during a global war, the metal remained one of the few assets capable of crossing political and economic barriers. Allied protection of gold. While the Axis powers attempted to seize gold reserves, the Allied nations took a very different approach. Many European governments recognized that their national gold reserves could become targets for invasion or occupation. To protect this wealth, they moved their gold far away from the front lines. Several countries transferred their gold reserves across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States and Canada. These transfers were carried out secretly and often under dangerous wartime conditions. Ships carrying gold crossed submarine-filled waters to reach safe storage locations. The goal was simple: prevent these reserves from falling into enemy hands. By storing gold in secure vaults overseas, governments ensured that they would still have financial resources available after the war ended. These reserves would later help rebuild economies and restore financial systems once peace returned. This decision demonstrated how governments viewed gold not only as a wartime asset, but also as a foundation for future recovery. Even in the chaos of global conflict, gold remained a long-term strategic reserve. Gold for survival. Beyond governments and armies, gold also played a deeply personal role during World War II. For countless civilians, especially those facing persecution or forced displacement, small amounts of gold could mean the difference between life and death. Jewish families fleeing Nazi persecution often carried whatever valuables they could hide. In many cases, this meant a few gold coins or pieces of jewelry sewn into clothing or hidden inside personal belongings. These small items had enormous importance. Gold could be exchanged on black markets for food, transportation, or shelter. It could be used to pay smugglers who helped people escape occupied territories. It could also help obtain forged documents needed to cross borders or avoid capture. For families trying to survive under extreme danger, gold provided options when official systems failed. Testimonies from Holocaust survivors frequently mention the role of gold in their escape stories. A few coins could buy a train ticket, secure a place in a truck crossing a border, or provide food for children during long journeys. In these situations, gold was far more than wealth. It was hope, mobility, and a chance to survive one of the darkest chapters in human history. Cold War, gold system. After the devastation of World War II, The world needed a new financial system that could restore stability and rebuild international trade. In 1944, representatives from dozens of countries gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design a new global monetary framework. The result was the Bretton Woods system. Under this arrangement, the United States dollar became the central currency of international trade. Other currencies were linked to the dollar, and the dollar itself was tied to gold at a fixed price of $35 per ounce. This system effectively made the US dollar as reliable as gold. Countries around the world trusted the dollar because they believed it could always be exchanged for physical gold held in American reserves. At the time, the United States possessed the largest gold reserves in the world, much of it stored in secure vaults such as Fort Knox. For several decades, this system supported global economic growth. International trade expanded, currencies remained relatively stable, and gold continued to serve as the ultimate foundation behind the monetary system. Although people increasingly used paper money and bank deposits, gold still stood quietly in the background as the anchor of financial trust. End of the gold standard. By the 1960s, however, the system began to face serious pressure. The United States was spending enormous amounts of money on government programs and military operations, particularly the Vietnam War. To finance these expenses, the US government began creating more dollars. As the supply of dollars increased, other countries started to question whether the United States actually held enough gold to back all the currency in circulation. Foreign governments began requesting to exchange their dollars for gold reserves. This created a dangerous situation for the American financial system. If too many countries demanded gold at the same time, the United States could lose a large portion of its gold reserves. To prevent this scenario, President Richard Nixon made a dramatic decision in 1971. He closed what became known as the gold window. This policy ended the direct convertibility of US dollars into gold. From that moment forward, the global financial system moved away from the gold standard and entered the era of fiat currency. Fiat money has value primarily because governments declare it legal tender, not because it is backed by physical gold. Gold in Vietnam. Escape. While global financial systems were changing, gold continued to play a practical role in human survival. During the final years of the Vietnam War, thousands of people desperately tried to escape the country as political and military conditions deteriorated. For many families, gold coins and small pieces of jewelry became the most valuable possessions they owned. Gold was often used to pay smugglers who organized secret escapes by boat or airplane. It could also be used to bribe officials or secure transportation to safer regions. Because gold was compact and widely recognized, it was far easier to carry than large amounts of paper currency. People fleeing Saigon frequently relied on gold to secure passage out of the country. These coins or small gold bars became a form of emergency currency in a time when banking systems were unreliable and governments were collapsing. A few grams of gold could buy a seat on a crowded boat or pay someone willing to help a family escape. Stories from that period illustrate an important lesson. Even when global financial systems shift and new currencies dominate international trade, gold continues to function as a trusted store of value during moments of extreme uncertainty. In the most desperate situations, gold becomes more than wealth. It becomes a lifeline. Yugoslavia inflation crisis. During the early 1990s, the breakup of Yugoslavia triggered one of the most severe inflation crises in modern European history. Political instability, economic collapse, and the fragmentation of the country created an environment where the national currency rapidly lost its value. Hyperinflation spread through the economy at incredible speed. Prices began changing not only every month or week, but sometimes several times within the same day. Newspapers reported situations where people carried entire bags filled with banknotes just to buy basic food. A loaf of bread could cost thousands or even millions of dinars, depending on the stage of inflation. The situation became so extreme that wages lost meaning. People might receive their salary in the morning, but by the afternoon, the value of that money had already fallen significantly. In cities such as Ljubljana and Belgrade, shop owners faced impossible choices. Accepting local currency meant risking that the money would lose value before it could be used to restock goods. Because of this uncertainty, many businesses began refusing dinars altogether. Instead, they preferred foreign currency or gold. Customers were often told to bring German marks or gold jewelry if they wanted to buy essential goods. In this chaotic environment, traditional money stopped functioning as a reliable store of value. Gold once again became a practical solution for survival. Argentina banking collapse. A similar lesson appeared years later in South America. In December 2001, Argentina experienced a dramatic financial crisis that shocked the entire country. The government introduced emergency measures that effectively froze bank accounts across the nation. This policy became known as the Corralito. Millions of citizens suddenly discovered that they could not withdraw their savings. Even people who had significant balances in their bank accounts were limited to extremely small withdrawals. Long lines formed outside banks and ATMs, but many machines simply stopped dispensing money. For families trying to buy food, fuel, and daily necessities, the situation was terrifying. Savings that had taken years to build were suddenly inaccessible. In this environment, gold and other physical assets gained enormous importance. Families who owned gold coins or jewelry could sell them privately and obtain cash, food, or other resources. Meanwhile, people who relied entirely on bank deposits often found themselves unable to access their own money. Argentina experienced another financial crisis in 2019, and once again people rushed toward assets that could hold value outside the banking system. Gold trading increased significantly, especially in informal markets. Ukraine war escape. In February 2022, war returned to Europe when Russia invaded Ukraine. Within days, millions of civilians began fleeing their homes and crossing borders into neighboring countries such as Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. For refugees, the first days of escape were chaotic. Banks were closed in many areas. Payment systems failed. Credit and debit cards sometimes stopped working, especially near conflict zones. Even when refugees carried cash, it was not always accepted in other countries. Families traveling with children faced enormous uncertainty. Many people carried only a few personal belongings in backpacks. Yet among those belongings, small pieces of gold often played a critical role. Some refugees brought gold coins, others carried rings, necklaces, or bracelets passed down through generations. These items could be sold once they reached safer countries, providing money for housing, food, and transportation. Stories from Ukrainian refugees illustrate how gold once again functioned as an emergency form of value. When formal systems break down during war, portable assets that hold universal value can become essential. For many families escaping conflict, gold became something far more important than jewelry. It became a passport to survival. Why gold works in crises? Across thousands of years of human history, gold has repeatedly appeared during moments of instability. Empires have collapsed, currencies have disappeared, and governments have changed. Yet gold continues to remain valuable. This raises an important question. Why does gold work so reliably during crises? One of the key reasons is its portability. Gold contains a large amount of value in a very small physical form. A single coin can represent a significant amount of purchasing power. Unlike land, buildings, or large physical goods, gold can be easily carried across borders in a pocket or small bag. This portability becomes crucial during emergencies. Families fleeing wars, refugees crossing borders, or individuals escaping economic collapse often cannot carry large amounts of possessions. In those moments, having wealth in a compact form can make the difference between survival and disaster. Another reason gold works during crises is its universal recognition. Gold has been used as money in civilizations around the world for thousands of years. Because of this long history, people across cultures understand its value immediately. A gold coin does not require translation, banking infrastructure, or government approval. It is simply recognized as valuable. Finally, gold operates independently from modern financial systems. It does not rely on electricity, internet connections, or digital networks. Even if banking systems fail or governments collapse, the metal itself remains intact and usable. These qualities make gold uniquely suited for uncertain times. Gold versus paper money. Paper money functions well when the economic system around it is stable. Governments regulate it, central banks control its supply, and financial institutions allow it to circulate through society. However, paper money has an important weakness. It depends entirely on trust. If people believe the government issuing the currency is stable and responsible, paper money retains its value. But when that confidence disappears, the currency can quickly lose credibility. History provides many examples of this process. During wars, governments often print large amounts of money to cover military expenses. When the supply of currency grows faster than the economy producing goods, inflation begins to rise. Over time, that inflation can erode savings and purchasing power. Banks can also become unreliable during crises. Governments may freeze accounts, limit withdrawals, or temporarily close financial institutions. When this happens, people may still technically own money, but they cannot access it when they need it most. Gold functions differently. Its value is not based on a government promise. Instead, it comes from scarcity, durability, and long historical acceptance as a store of wealth. These characteristics allow gold to maintain value even when financial systems struggle. The lesson of history. Looking back through history, a clear pattern emerges. Alexander the Great financed his conquests with vast reserves of gold. The Roman Empire relied on gold coins to maintain economic stability across its territories. During World War II, families escaping persecution used gold coins and jewelry to secure food, documents, and safe passage. More recently, people in Yugoslavia used gold to survive hyperinflation in the 1990s. Families in Argentina relied on gold when banks froze accounts. Ukrainian refugees carried gold jewelry when fleeing war in 2022. These stories come from different centuries and continents, yet they share a common message. When political systems break down and financial institutions fail, gold often becomes one of the few assets people can trust. This does not mean gold replaces modern financial systems. In stable times, digital payments and banking networks provide convenience and efficiency that gold cannot match. But history reminds us that stability is never guaranteed. In moments when uncertainty returns, gold continues to serve the same role it has played for millennia. A reliable store of value that can help people protect their wealth and, in some cases, their lives. And that is why, throughout history, people have repeated a simple and powerful idea. Those who hold gold are often better prepared when crises arrive.